The pounding on Tobias Barrett's cabin door came just after midnight, when the autumn rain had turned from a drizzle into a relentless downpour that hammered against the roof like 1,000 desperate fists. He jerked awake in his bed, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall, muscles tensing beneath his worn cotton shirt as years of mountain living kicked his senses into high alert. Nobody came up this far into the Colorado Rockies without a damn good reason, especially not in weather like this, and especially not at this ungodly hour in October of 1878. The knocking came again, weaker this time, more pleading than demanding. Tobias swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor as he grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door, with the practiced silence of a man who had spent the better part of his 32 years learning to survive in places where civilization was just a distant memory. His long, dark hair, which reached past his shoulders, fell forward as he peered through the gap in the shutters. The lantern he had lit cast flickering shadows across his cabin, highlighting the impressive breadth of his shoulders and the corded muscles in his arms that came from years of chopping wood, hauling water, and wrestling with the untamed wilderness. Through the rain-streaked window, he could barely make out a figure on his porch. Small, hunched over, definitely not threatening. The figures swayed slightly, and even through the storm he could hear a woman's voice. "Please," she called out, her words nearly lost in the wind. "Please, I need help. I am begging you." Tobias lowered his rifle and unlatched the heavy wooden door, pulling it open to reveal a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A young woman stood on his porch, soaked through to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck. Her dress, which might have once been a respectable calico print, clung to her frame, revealing the unmistakable swell of her pregnant belly. She looked up at him with eyes that held equal parts desperation and determination. And in that moment, something in his chest tightened in a way he had not felt in years. "I am so sorry," she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. "I did not know where else to go. My horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back, and I have been walking and I just saw your light and I thought maybe you could spare a corner of your barn, or even just your porch until the storm passes." Tobias did not hesitate. He set his rifle aside and stepped forward, his large frame filling the doorway as he reached out to steady her when she swayed again. Her skin was ice-cold beneath his calloused fingers, and he could feel her trembling from head to toe. "Get inside," he said, his voice gruff from disuse. He did not entertain visitors often, and his social graces had grown rusty over the years of solitude. "You will freeze to death out here." She stumbled forward and he caught her easily, one arm wrapping around her waist to support her weight as he guided her into the warmth of his cabin. She was so slight despite her condition that it seemed impossible she had managed to walk 5 miles through mountain terrain in this weather. The thought of what might have happened if she had not found his cabin made his jaw clench. "Sit," he commanded, steering her toward the chair closest to the fireplace. The fire had burned down to embers while he slept, but he quickly set about building it back up, adding logs until flames began to lick at the wood with renewed vigor. The woman sank into the chair with a grateful sob, wrapping her arms around herself as shivers racked her body. Tobias moved through his cabin with efficient purpose, grabbing a thick wool blanket from his bed and draping it over her shoulders before heading to the corner where he kept his stores. He filled a tin cup with water from the pitcher on his table and brought it to her, pressing it into her shaking hands. "Drink," he said, watching as she obeyed immediately. Her throat worked as she swallowed, and he noticed bruises on her wrists that her wet sleeves had not quite hidden. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. There would be time for questions later, after she was warm and safe. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him with eyes the color of honey in firelight. "Thank you so much. I thought I was going to die out there." "You damn near did," Tobias said bluntly. He crouched down in front of her, his powerful thighs bunching beneath his trousers as he studied her face. She was young, probably not more than 23 or 24, with delicate features that would have been pretty if they were not currently pinched with cold and exhaustion. "What in God's name are you doing traveling alone in your condition?" Her face crumpled slightly, and she looked away, her fingers tightening on the cup. "I did not have a choice." Tobias recognized that tone. He had heard it before from other women who had passed through Cannon City on their way to somewhere else, running from husbands or fathers or situations that had become unbearable. The wilderness attracted all kinds, but it had a special appeal for those seeking to disappear. "What is your name?" he asked, gentling his voice as much as he was able. "Beatrice," she said softly. "Beatrice Daniels." "Tobias Barrett," he replied. "And you are going to stay here tonight, Miss Daniels. Or is it Mrs. Daniels?" "Miss," she said quickly, then seemed to reconsider. "Well, it is complicated." "Most things are," Tobias said, rising to his full height of 6 feet and 3 inches. His shadow fell across her, but instead of seeming intimidated, Beatrice looked relieved, as though his presence represented safety rather than threat. I am going to get you some dry clothes. They will be too big, but they are better than what you are wearing now. He rummaged through his trunk and pulled out one of his flannel shirts and a pair of long underwear. They would swallow her whole, but at least they were clean and dry. He handed them to her along with a towel. There is a screen in the corner, he said, gesturing toward a wooden partition that sectioned off a small area of the cabin. You can change there. I will turn my back. Beatrice stood on unsteady legs, clutching the clothes to her chest. You are very kind, Mr. Barrett. Just practical, he muttered, but he felt his ears grow warm at the praise. He busied himself with checking the fire and putting a kettle on to boil while she changed behind the screen. He tried not to think about the soft rustling sounds or the way her silhouette appeared against the flickering firelight. It had been a long time since he had shared his space with anyone, let alone a woman, and especially not one who stirred something protective and primal in his chest. When she emerged, she looked like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. The shirt hung past her knees, and she had rolled the sleeves up multiple times, but her hair was no longer dripping and some color had returned to her cheeks. She had draped her wet dress over the screen to dry. Better? Tobias asked. Much, she said, offering him a small smile that transformed her face. I cannot thank you enough. You can thank me by sitting back down and drinking some tea when the water boils, Tobias said, and then you can tell me what you are doing out here alone. Beatrice's smile faded, but she nodded and returned to the chair by the fire. Tobias prepared tea from his small supply of herbs, sweetening it with a bit of honey he had traded for in town last month. When he handed her the steaming mug, she wrapped both hands around it and breathed in the fragrant steam. My husband died, she said suddenly, staring into the tea. 3 months ago, he was a gambler, and he got himself killed over a card game in Denver. Left me with nothing but debts and this baby. Tobias settled into the chair opposite her, his large frame making the sturdy wooden seat seem small. I am sorry, do not be, Beatrice said with a bitterness that surprised him. He was not a good man. The marriage was arranged by my father, who needed connections more than he needed to ensure his daughter's happiness. When my husband died, I thought maybe I would finally be free, but then his creditors came calling. They wanted payment, and when I could not give it to them, they suggested other ways I might settle his debts. Her hand moved protectively to her swollen belly, and Tobias felt anger flare hot in his chest. He knew exactly what kind of suggestions those men had made. So you ran, he said. So I ran, she confirmed. I had a little money saved, enough to buy a horse and some supplies. I was heading toward Cannon City because I heard there were decent people there who might give me work, even in my condition. But then the storm hit, and my horse threw a shoe and everything went wrong. Her voice broke slightly. I really thought I was going to die out there. You did not, Tobias said firmly. You are here, and you are safe, and nothing is going to happen to you under my roof. Beatrice looked at him with those honey-colored eyes, and he saw tears glistening in them. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. You could be, Tobias agreed, but you are not. I have gotten good at reading people over the years, and I can see you are telling the truth. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I am not going to pretend to be some kind of saint, Miss Daniels. I came up here to get away from people because I got tired of watching them hurt each other. But I am not so far gone that I would turn away a woman in need, especially one who is carrying a child. What will I do? Beatrice whispered. I cannot stay here forever, and I have nowhere else to go. You will stay here as long as you need to, Tobias said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, we will figure out the rest. But for tonight you sleep and you do not worry about anything else. Where will you sleep? She asked, looking around the cabin with its single bed in the corner. I have slept in worse places than a chair, Tobias said, standing up. You take the bed. I will not hear any arguments about it. Beatrice looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion was clearly winning the battle. She set down her empty tea mug and stood, swaying slightly. Tobias was at her side in an instant, his hand on her elbow to steady her. I have you, he said softly, and she leaned into him slightly, her head barely reaching the middle of his chest. He guided her to the bed and pulled back the heavy quilts so she could climb in. She settled against the pillows with a sigh that spoke of relief so profound it made his chest ache. He tucked the blankets around her, his movements gentle despite his size and rough appearance. Thank you, Tobias, she murmured, already half asleep. Rest, Beatrice, he replied, and then he moved back to his chair by the fire, settling his large frame as comfortably as he could manage. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin warmth and safety prevailed. Tobias sat awake long into the night, watching the fire and listening to Beatrice's soft breathing. He had meant what he said about getting away from people, about preferring solitude to the mess and pain that came with human connection. But as he sat there in the darkness, with a pregnant stranger sleeping peacefully in his bed, he realized that maybe he had been lying to himself all these years. Maybe what he had really been doing was waiting for something or someone to remind him why connection mattered in the first place. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and sparkling. Tobias, who had dozed fitfully in his chair, woke to find Beatrice still asleep, her face peaceful in the morning light. He moved quietly around the cabin, building up the fire and starting breakfast. He had eggs from his chickens, bacon from the pig he had slaughtered last month, and bread he had baked 2 days ago. It was simple fare, but it was hearty and filling. The smell of cooking food eventually roused Beatrice, who sat up slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. Tobias looked over and saw her wince. "You all right?" he asked. "Just stiff from the walk yesterday," she said, "and the baby has been pressing on my back something fierce lately." "How far along are you?" Tobias asked, flipping the bacon in the pan. 7 months, I think," Beatrice said, pushing the blankets aside and standing. She was still wearing his oversized shirt, and her legs were bare beneath it. Tobias quickly looked away, focusing on his cooking. "Maybe a bit more. It is hard to be persons. You should not be traveling at all," he said, more harshly than he intended. "I know," Beatrice said quietly. "But what choice did I have?" Tobias plated the food and brought it to the small table, gesturing for her to sit. She did, and he noticed the way her eyes widened at the generous portions he had given her. "This is too much," she protested. "You are eating for 2, he countered, "and you probably have not had a decent meal in days. Eat." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Beatrice spoke again. "You said we would figure things out today. What did you mean?" Tobias finished chewing a piece of bacon and swallowed. "I meant that we need to decide what happens next. You said you were heading to Cannon City. That is about a day's ride from here, 2 days if we take it slow. I can take you there, help you find work or a place to stay." "You would do that for me?" Beatrice asked, her eyes wide. "I would," Tobias confirmed. "But I have another suggestion, if you are willing to hear it." "I am listening." "You could stay here," he said, the words coming out in a rush, "just until the baby comes and you are strong enough to travel safely. Winter is coming, and it is not going to be any easier to find work or shelter when the snows start. Up here you would be safe. Nobody knows about this place except me and a few trappers who pass through occasionally. Those creditors or anyone else looking for you would never find you." Beatrice stared at him, her fork halfway to her mouth. "You would let me stay here, in your cabin, for months?" "I would," Tobias said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I know it is not an ideal situation. This place is small and I am not the best company. But it is warm and I have enough supplies to last through winter and you would be safe. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Beatrice said softly. "But I cannot just impose on you like that. What would you get out of this arrangement?" Tobias considered the question. What would he get? Company, for one thing, though he was not sure that was something he wanted to admit out loud. But there was something else, something deeper. A sense of purpose, maybe. A reason to be more than just a man hiding from the world. "Peace of mind," he finally said. "Knowing you and your baby are safe. That is enough for me." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears and she set down her fork. "I do not understand why you are doing this. You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "Maybe I do not," Tobias said, "but that does not mean I cannot help anyway. Sometimes people just need help, and sometimes other people are in a position to give it. That is all this is." "I do not think that is all this is," Beatrice said, wiping at her eyes. "I think you have a good heart, Tobias Barrett, no matter how much you try to hide it." Tobias felt his ears grow warm again, and he focused on his breakfast to avoid her penetrating gaze. "So what do you say? Will you stay?" "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay, thank you." Over the following days, they fell into a routine that surprised both of them with its ease. Tobias went about his usual tasks of chopping wood, checking his traps, and tending to his small garden and animals, while Beatrice rested and recovered from her ordeal. She proved to be resourceful despite her condition, insisting on helping with cooking and mending his clothes, which she claimed were in desperate need of attention. "How long have you been living up here alone?" she asked one afternoon, holding up a shirt with a tear in the sleeve. "About 8 years, Tobias said from his position by the woodpile where he was splitting logs with powerful, efficient swings of his axe. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool autumn air, and the muscles in his back and shoulders flexed with each movement. 8 years, Beatrice repeated, shaking her head. "That is a long time to be alone." "I prefer it that way," Tobias said, though the words felt less true than they once had. "Do you?" Beatrice challenged gently. "Or did you just convince yourself you preferred it because it was easier than risking getting hurt again?" Tobias paused mid-swing and looked over at her. She was sitting on the porch in the chair he had brought out for her, her hands busy with her mending but her eyes fixed on him with an understanding that made him uncomfortable. "You do not know what you are talking about," he said, but there was no heat in the words. "Maybe not," Beatrice conceded. "But I know what it is like to build walls around yourself. I did the same thing in my marriage. It was easier to feel nothing than to feel everything and be disappointed when nothing changed. Tobias set down his axe and walked over to the porch, leaning against one of the support posts. What happened to you, Beatrice? I mean, really happened? You said your husband was not a good man, but there is more to it than that, is there not? Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with practiced precision. He hurt me, she finally said. Not often and never where anyone could see, but often enough that I learned to stay quiet and invisible. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe it would change things, maybe he would be happy, and we could be a real family. But he just got angry, said I had trapped him, that he did not want a child, and then he went out and gambled away everything we had and got himself killed, and I felt relieved. Is that horrible? To feel relieved that your husband is dead? No, Tobias said firmly. It is honest, and sometimes honesty feels horrible, but that does not make it wrong. Beatrice looked up at him with those honey-colored eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. What about you? What made you come up here? Tobias sighed and ran a hand through his long hair. I had a life in Cannon City once. A job at the mill, friends, even a woman I thought I might marry. But then there was an accident at the mill. A beam fell, killed 2 men, and I was the foreman. I should have caught the problem before anyone got hurt, but I did not. After that, I could not stay. Every time I looked at the widows, at the children who no longer had fathers, I saw my failure. So I left, built this cabin, and told myself I was better off alone. That was not your fault, Beatrice said softly. Maybe not, Tobias said. But it felt like it was, and that was enough. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk. It was Beatrice who broke the silence first. We are quite a pair, are not we? Both running from our pasts, both trying to convince ourselves we are better off alone. And now we are stuck together, Tobias said, the corner of his mouth quirking up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. I do not feel stuck, Beatrice said, returning his almost smile with one of her own. I feel lucky. Over the next few weeks, autumn deepened into the promise of winter. The aspen trees turned gold and shed their leaves, and the mornings grew crisp with frost. Tobias worked long days preparing for the cold months ahead, while Beatrice continued to settle into life at the cabin. She was endlessly curious about everything, asking him questions about the plants and animals, about how he survived up here alone, about what he did with his days. Do you ever get bored? She asked one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. Sometimes, Tobias admitted, mostly in winter when it is too cold to do much outside. I read when I have books, carve things out of wood. Think too much, probably. What do you carve? Beatrice asked. Leaning forward with interest, Tobias hesitated, then got up and went to a shelf in the corner. He returned with several small wooden figures, a bear, a wolf, an eagle in flight. They were beautifully detailed, showing a skill and patience that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. These are amazing, Beatrice breathed, turning the eagle over in her hands. You made all of these? It passes the time, Tobias said, embarrassed by her praise. It is more than that, Beatrice said. This is art. You have real talent. I do not know about that, Tobias muttered, but he felt pleased nonetheless. Would you make something for the baby? Beatrice asked suddenly, looking up at him with hope in her eyes. I know it is a lot to ask, but I do not have anything for the child, and it would mean so much to have something special. Of course, Tobias said without hesitation. What would you like? Surprise me, Beatrice said with a smile that made his heart do strange things in his chest. That night, after Beatrice had gone to bed, Tobias sat up by the fire and began to carve. He chose a piece of soft pine and let his hands work without thinking too much about it. What emerged over the next several nights was a small cradle, perfectly sized for a newborn, with delicate carvings of mountain flowers along the sides. He sanded it until it was smooth as silk, not wanting any rough edges that might harm tender baby skin. When he presented it to Beatrice a week later, she burst into tears. I am sorry, she gasped, wiping at her eyes. I cry at everything these days, but Tobias, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me. Thank you. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a quick press of lips that should not have felt like anything, but somehow felt like everything. Tobias stood frozen, acutely aware of her closeness, of the way she smelled like the lavender soap he had traded for in town, of the warmth radiating from her body. You are welcome, he managed, his voice rough. Beatrice stepped back, and he thought he saw a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with pregnancy or the warmth of the fire. The air between them crackled with something new and fragile, something neither of them was quite ready to name. As November arrived, bringing with it the first real snowfall, the dynamic in the cabin continued to shift. They talked more, sharing stories of their lives before they had met. Beatrice told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a merchant who cared more about his business than his family. She talked about her mother who had died when Beatrice was 14, leaving her to navigate a household run by a father who saw her as little more than a commodity to be traded for business advantages. Tobias, in turn, shared more about his life before the mountains. He talked about his family, his parents who had died of influenza when he was 20, his younger sister who had married a rancher in Wyoming and who he had not seen in years. He talked about the guilt that still haunted him over the mill accident, and Beatrice listened without judgment, offering comfort simply by being present. They were sitting by the fire one evening in mid-November when Beatrice suddenly gasped and pressed a hand to her belly. "What is wrong?" Tobias asked, immediately alert. "Nothing," Beatrice said with a laugh. "The baby is just kicking up a storm. Here, feel." She reached out and grabbed his hand before he could protest, pressing it against the swell of her belly. For a moment there was nothing, and then he felt it, a strong, unmistakable kick against his palm. His eyes widened in wonder. "That is amazing," he breathed. "That is uncomfortable," Beatrice said with a laugh. "This child is going to be a fighter, I can tell already." Tobias kept his hand where it was, feeling another kick and then another. "Strong," he said approvingly. "That is good. Strong is how you survive in this world." "You would know," Beatrice said softly, looking up at him. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Tobias. Not just physically, but in every way that matters." "I do not feel strong," Tobias admitted. "Not when it comes to you." The words were out before he could stop them, and he saw Beatrice's eyes widen slightly. He should pull his hand away, should put distance between them, but he found he could not move. "What do you mean?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean that you have turned my whole world upside down," Tobias said, the honesty pouring out of him now like water from a broken dam. "I came up here to be alone, to never care about anyone again, and then you showed up on my doorstep and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. I should want you to leave. I should be counting the days until you are gone and I can go back to my solitary life. But instead I find myself dreading that day. I dread the thought of this cabin being empty again, of not hearing your voice or your laughter, and I do not know what to do with that." Beatrice's hand came up to cover his where it still rested on her belly. "You could tell me how you feel," she said softly. "You could be honest about what you want." "What I want," Tobias repeated, his throat tight. "I want you to stay, not just until the baby comes, but after. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are here. I want to take care of you and protect you and make you laugh. I want things I have no right to want because you are going through something difficult and I should not be taking advantage of that." "You are not taking advantage of anything," Beatrice said firmly. "Do you think I have not felt this too? This connection between us? I have spent every day trying to convince myself it is just gratitude, that I only care about you because you saved me. But it is more than that, Tobias, so much more. When I look at you, I see everything I thought I would never have: kindness, strength, honesty. You make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before, and not just physically safe. You make me feel like I can be myself, like I do not have to hide or pretend or make myself small." Beatrice, Tobias said, her name a prayer on his lips. "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too fast and too complicated and probably foolish, but I cannot help it. You have shown me what it means to be truly cared for, and I do not want to let that go." Tobias cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "It is not foolish," he said, "and it is not just you. I am falling too, have been since the night you showed up here, if I am being honest." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she did not. Instead, she tilted her face up to meet his, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "What do we do now?" Beatrice asked, resting her forehead against his chest. "Now we figure it out together," Tobias said, wrapping his arms around her carefully, mindful of her belly. One day at a time. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Tobias's life. They continued to share the cabin, though now there was an openness between them that had not existed before. They held hands while watching the fire, shared lingering kisses when the mood struck, and talked about the future with a cautious optimism that grew stronger each day. Tobias made plans to expand the cabin in the spring, adding another room that could serve as a nursery. He talked about building a bigger barn, maybe getting some cattle to go along with his chickens and the pig. Beatrice talked about planting a garden, about teaching the baby to read, about all the ways they could make this isolated mountain cabin into a real home. But for all their planning and hope, there was still an unspoken worry that hung between them. Beatrice's pregnancy was advancing, and soon the baby would come. Tobias had helped birth calves and foals, but a human baby was different. They were fragile and complicated, and he knew that without a doctor or midwife present, the risks were significant. "I am scared," Beatrice admitted one night in early December as snow fell softly outside the window. She was lying on the bed while Tobias sat beside her, his large hand rubbing gentle circles on her lower back where she said the pain was worst. I know, Tobias said softly. I am scared too. What if something goes wrong? She whispered. What if I cannot do this? You can, Tobias said with absolute conviction. You are the strongest person I know, Beatrice. You have survived things that would have broken most people, and you kept going. You will get through this too, and I will be right there with you every step of the way. Promise? She asked, looking up at him with vulnerable eyes. Promise, he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I am not going anywhere. 2 weeks before Christmas, Beatrice went into labor. It started just after dawn with mild contractions that she tried to hide from Tobias at first, not wanting to worry him unnecessarily. But by mid-morning, the contractions were too strong to ignore, and when he saw her gripping the edge of the table and breathing hard through a particularly painful one, he knew it was time. Why did you not tell me sooner? He demanded, helping her to the bed. I did not want to alarm you before it was necessary, Beatrice gasped. But I think it is necessary now. Tobias had prepared as well as he could, gathering clean linens and boiling water and laying out the few supplies he had. But now that the moment was actually here, he felt woefully unprepared. What did he know about birthing babies? What if he did something wrong? What if he lost her? Tobias, Beatrice said, reaching for his hand. Look at me. He met her eyes, seeing his own fear reflected back at him along with something else. Trust. She trusted him completely, and that knowledge steadied him in a way nothing else could have. We can do this, she said. Together, he agreed. The labor was long and difficult. Hour after hour passed, with Beatrice working through each contraction with a determination that awed him. Tobias stayed by her side the entire time, offering water and cool cloths for her forehead, supporting her when she needed to walk, holding her hand when the pain became almost unbearable. He murmured encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. As night fell and the contractions grew closer together, Beatrice's strength began to flag. She was exhausted, her face pale and drawn, and Tobias could see the fear creeping into her eyes. I cannot do this, she sobbed after a particularly brutal contraction. It is too much. I cannot. You can, Tobias said fiercely, gripping her hand tightly. You are so close, Beatrice. Just a little more. I know you can do this. I am so tired, she whispered. I know, he said, brushing sweat-dampened hair back from her face. But you are the strongest person I have ever known, and you are going to get through this. And when you do, we are going to have a beautiful baby, and we are going to be a family. That is worth fighting for, is it not? Beatrice looked up at him, and something in his words seemed to kindle a new fire in her eyes. A family, she repeated. Yes, yes. That is worth fighting for. She bore down with renewed determination, and Tobias positioned himself to catch the baby, praying that he would know what to do when the moment came. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, he saw the crown of the baby's head. I can see the baby, he told Beatrice, his voice shaking with emotion. One more push. You can do this. Beatrice gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed, and suddenly Tobias found himself holding a tiny, squirming infant. For a moment he was frozen, staring in wonder at the miracle in his hands. Then the baby let out a lusty cry, and he laughed with relief. It is a girl, he said, his eyes filling with tears. Beatrice, we have a daughter. He quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft flannel before laying her on Beatrice's chest. Beatrice was crying openly now, her arms coming around the infant with fierce protectiveness. Hello, little one, she whispered. Hello, my beautiful girl. Tobias finished caring for Beatrice, making sure she was comfortable and that everything was as it should be. Then he collapsed into the chair beside the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from doing something important and doing it well. Thank you, Beatrice said, looking over at him with shining eyes. Thank you for being here, for helping me through that. I could not have done it without you. You could have, Tobias said, but I am glad you did not have to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the baby sleep. She was perfect, with a tiny rosebud mouth and wispy dark hair. Tobias felt something shift in his chest, an overwhelming surge of love and protectiveness that took his breath away. What should we name her? Beatrice asked. Tobias thought for a moment. What about Rose, for the wild roses that grow on the mountain in summer? Rose, Beatrice repeated, trying it out. Rose Barrett. If you want her to have my name, Tobias said carefully. I would be honored. I do, Beatrice said firmly. But only if you marry me first. Tobias stared at her, his mouth falling open slightly. Are you proposing to me? I am, Beatrice said with a tired smile. I know it is unconventional, but then again, nothing about our situation has been conventional. I love you, Tobias Barrett, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want Rose to grow up with a father who adores her, and I want us to be a real family. So yes, I am proposing. Will you marry me? Tobias felt like his heart might burst. He leaned over and kissed her gently, mindful of the baby between them. Yes, he said against her lips. Yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier. Christmas came, bringing with it a heavy snowfall that blanketed the mountain in white. Tobias and Beatrice spent the holiday in their cozy cabin with baby Rose, who was thriving despite the harsh winter conditions. Tobias had fashioned a simple ring from a piece of silver he had been saving, and they exchanged vows by firelight, with only the baby and the mountain as witnesses. "I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life," Tobias said, slipping the ring onto Beatrice's finger. "I promise to be a good husband and a good father, and to never let you doubt how much you mean to me." "I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes," Beatrice replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love you fiercely and honestly, and to build a life with you that neither of us ever dreamed was possible." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and if it was not the most traditional wedding ceremony, it was certainly one of the most heartfelt. That night, with Rose sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Beatrice curled against his side in bed, Tobias felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. Winter passed slowly, as winters in the mountains always did. The world outside was frozen and harsh, but inside the cabin life was warm and full. Rose grew rapidly, her dark hair thickening and her eyes settling into a warm brown that reminded Tobias of her mother. He spent hours carving toys for her, talking to her in soft tones, marveling at every tiny milestone. Beatrice blossomed in motherhood, her love for their daughter evident in every gentle touch and whispered lullaby. But she also made time for Tobias, showing him in 1,000 small ways how much she loved him. They talked long into the night, dreamed together about the future, and built an intimacy that went far beyond the physical. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and coaxing new growth from the earth, Tobias began work on expanding the cabin. He added a proper bedroom for himself and Beatrice, giving Rose the original sleeping area as a nursery. He built a larger barn and acquired 2 milk cows from a trapper passing through. The cabin began to feel less like a hermit's retreat and more like a real home. One warm afternoon in May, when Rose was 5 months old, Beatrice announced that she wanted to plant a garden. "A big one," she said, gesturing to a flat area near the cabin. "With vegetables and herbs and flowers. I want Rose to grow up knowing how to grow things, how to nurture life." "That sounds perfect," Tobias said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "We can start preparing the ground tomorrow." They worked side by side in the garden over the following weeks, with Rose lying on a blanket nearby, cooing and watching the clouds. Beatrice proved to have a natural talent for growing things, and soon they had neat rows of beans, peas, carrots, and potatoes. She also planted wildflower seeds along the edges, saying that every garden needed beauty as well as practicality. As summer deepened, bringing long golden days and warm nights, their little family fell into a rhythm that felt right. Tobias hunted and fished and tended to the animals, while Beatrice cared for Rose and the garden and the cabin. They shared meals and chores and the quiet companionship of 2 people who had found their place in the world. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Beatrice turned to Tobias with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "letting me stay that first night? Your life was so simple before I came along." Tobias pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Simple maybe, but it was not really living. I was just existing, Beatrice. Going through the motions day after day without any real purpose. You gave me that purpose. You and Rose, you are the reason I get up in the morning, excited about what the day will bring. I have never regretted a single moment since you knocked on my door." "Even during the labor?" Beatrice teased. "You looked pretty terrified." "Especially during the labor," Tobias said with a laugh. "That terror reminded me that I had something worth being terrified about, something worth fighting for." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Rose babbling to herself inside the cabin. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. "I want to have more children," she said softly. "If you do, I mean. I want Rose to have siblings, to grow up in a house full of love and laughter." "I want that too," Tobias said, his heart swelling at the thought. "As many children as you want to have." "I want at least 3 more," Beatrice said decisively. "Maybe 4. I want this cabin to be bursting at the seams with life." "Then that is what we will have," Tobias said, leaning down to kiss her temple. "Whatever makes you happy, Beatrice, that is what I want too." As the summer progressed, their dreams continued to grow along with the garden. They talked about eventually building a proper house, something bigger that could accommodate the large family they hoped to have. They talked about teaching Rose and her future siblings to read and write, about instilling in them the values of hard work and kindness and perseverance. In August, a traveling preacher passed through the area, and Tobias convinced him to come to the cabin and perform a proper wedding ceremony. This time, their vows were official and legal, recorded in the preacher's book for all time. Beatrice wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Tobias had bought on a rare trip to Cannon City, and Tobias had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion. Rose, dressed in a little gown Beatrice had lovingly crafted, gurgled happily throughout the ceremony, as if she understood the significance of the moment. You may kiss your bride, the preacher said with a smile. Tobias did, pouring all of his love and devotion into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. How does it feel to be officially married? Beatrice asked as the preacher rode away, leaving them alone once more. Exactly the same as it did before, Tobias said honestly. Because I have felt married to you since the moment I realized I loved you. The words in the ceremony, they are just a formality. What matters is what we have here. He placed his hand over his heart, and what we have here. He gestured to the cabin, to Rose playing on her blanket, to the life they had built together. I love you, Beatrice said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. So much. I love you too, Tobias replied. Always. As autumn arrived again, bringing with it the 1-year anniversary of the night Beatrice had appeared at his door, they celebrated quietly. Tobias had carved a small wooden plaque and hung it beside the door. On it he had burned the words, "The Barrett Family Home, Est October 1878. It is perfect," Beatrice said, running her fingers over the carved letters. "This is really ours now, is it not? A real home, a real family. It has always been yours," Tobias said. "From the moment you walked through that door. I just did not know it yet." That winter was easier than the previous one, with their expanded cabin and well-stocked stores. Rose was walking now, toddling around on chubby legs and getting into everything. She had Tobias wrapped around her tiny finger, and he spent hours playing with her, making her laugh with his silly faces and gentle roughhousing. In February, Beatrice announced that she was pregnant again. Tobias lifted her off her feet in his excitement, spinning her around until she laughingly demanded to be put down. "We are having another baby," he said wonderingly. "Rose is going to be a big sister." "She is," Beatrice confirmed, her hand moving to her still flat belly. "Are you happy?" "I am more than happy," Tobias said. "I am overwhelmed with joy. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for giving me this life, this family. I never thought I would have this, and now I cannot imagine anything else." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, with Beatrice healthy and strong throughout. Tobias continued to expand their home and their small farm, building a chicken coop and adding more animals. He also began teaching Rose her letters, using a slate and chalk he had bought in town. She was a quick learner, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. In October of 1880, 2 years to the day after Beatrice had first knocked on his door, she gave birth to their second daughter. This time, Tobias was calmer and more confident, guiding her through the labor with steady hands and encouraging words. When the baby emerged, pink and squalling, he felt the same rush of overwhelming love he had felt with Rose. "What should we name her?" Beatrice asked, cradling the infant against her chest. "Lily," Tobias suggested, "for the water lilies that grow in the pond down the mountain." "Rose and Lily," Beatrice said with a smile, "are little flowers. I love it." Rose, now 2 years old, was fascinated by her baby sister. She wanted to help with everything, from changing diapers to singing lullabies. Under Beatrice's patient guidance, she learned to be gentle, to share, to love this new addition to their family. The years that followed were full and rich. In 1882, Beatrice gave birth to twin boys, whom they named Thomas and Timothy. Tobias built another addition to the cabin, this one a long bunkhouse-style room where the children could sleep. Their family was growing, and so was their joy. Beatrice proved to be a remarkable mother, balancing the needs of 4 young children with grace and humor. She homeschooled them all, teaching them reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills like cooking and sewing. Tobias taught them about the land, about tracking and hunting and respecting nature. Together they instilled in their children the values that mattered: kindness, honesty, hard work, and love. In 1884, their 5th child was born, a girl they named Violet. Rose, now 6, declared herself the official helper and took her role very seriously. The cabin was indeed bursting at the seams with life, just as Beatrice had hoped. On quiet evenings when the children were finally asleep and the cabin was peaceful, Tobias and Beatrice would sit together by the fire, holding hands and marveling at what they had built. "Do you remember that first night?" Beatrice asked one such evening, "when I was standing on your porch in the rain, begging for shelter." "I remember," Tobias said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even soaked to the bone and terrified." "I thought you were going to turn me away," Beatrice admitted. "You looked so fierce standing there in the doorway, with your rifle and your long hair and all those muscles." "I was never going to turn you away," Tobias said. "Something in me knew even then that you were important, that you were going to change everything." "We changed each other," Beatrice said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You taught me what it means to be truly loved, to be valued and protected. And I like to think I taught you that it is okay to let people in, to build connections, to live fully instead of just existing." "You did," Tobias confirmed. "You saved me, Beatrice, just as much as I saved you that night." As the years continued to pass, their family remained strong and close. The children grew, learning from their parents' example of love and devotion. Rose became a skilled seamstress like her mother, while also inheriting Tobias's talent for carving. Lily had a gift for growing things, spending hours in the ever-expanding garden. The twins were energetic and adventurous, always exploring and getting into mischief. And Violet, the baby, was sweet-natured and observant, soaking up everything around her. In 1886, when Rose was 8 and Violet was 2, Beatrice found herself pregnant one final time. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Tobias worried constantly. But Beatrice remained optimistic, trusting in her body and in Tobias's ability to help her through whatever came. In March of 1887, she gave birth to their 6th child, another boy they named Theodore. The labor was difficult, and afterward Beatrice admitted that she thought this might be their last child. 6 is a good number, she said tiredly, but with satisfaction. 6 beautiful children, we have been so blessed, Tobias. We have, he agreed, looking around at their brood. Rose was holding baby Theodore, the twins were wrestling on the floor under Lily's watchful eye, and Violet was curled up in a chair with a picture book. We have everything. Their cabin, which had started as a simple one-room structure, had grown into a sprawling compound. In addition to the expanded main house, Tobias had built a proper barn, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and a workshop where he crafted furniture and tools. The garden had expanded to nearly an acre, providing most of their food. They had chickens, cows, pigs, and even a few sheep. It was a thriving homestead, a testament to years of hard work and love. As the 1890s approached, their older children began to come into their own. Rose, now in her early teens, was becoming a young woman, beautiful and capable like her mother. She talked about wanting to be a teacher someday, to help other children learn and grow. Tobias and Beatrice encouraged her dreams, knowing that their children would eventually leave to make their own way in the world. But for now they were all together, a tight-knit family bound by love and shared experience. On Sundays they would all gather together for a family meal, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. Tobias would tell stories of his adventures in the wilderness, and Beatrice would share tales from her childhood in St. Louis. The children would perform songs or recite poems they had memorized, showing off what they had learned. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the family gathered on the expanded porch to watch the sunset. Theodore, now 3, sat on Tobias's lap, while Violet leaned against Beatrice. The older children were scattered around, content and peaceful. "Tell us the story again," Rose said suddenly. "The story of how you and Mama met." Tobias looked at Beatrice and they shared a smile. They had told this story many times over the years, but it never got old. "It was a night much like this," Tobias began, his deep voice carrying across the porch, "only colder and raining. I was alone in this cabin, which was much smaller then, when I heard a knock on my door." "And you thought it was a bear," Timothy interjected with a grin. "I did not think it was a bear," Tobias said with mock indignation. "I thought it might be trouble. But when I opened that door, I found your mother standing there in the rain, soaked through and pregnant with your sister Rose. I was so scared," Beatrice added. "I did not know if your father would help me or turn me away. But he took one look at me and brought me inside without hesitation. Because I could see she needed help," Tobias said, his hand finding Beatrice's and lacing their fingers together. "And I have never regretted that decision. That was the best night of my life, because it was the night I met your mother." "Even though you were scared?" Violet asked. "Especially because I was scared," Tobias said. "The best things in life often start with being scared, with taking a risk and doing something that feels uncertain. But when you find the right person, when you find your family, all that fear becomes worth it." "Do you still love Mama as much as you did then?" Thomas asked. "More," Tobias said firmly, looking into Beatrice's eyes. "Every day I love her more, because every day she shows me new reasons to love her. That is what real love is. It is not just a feeling that happens once and stays the same. It grows and changes and deepens with time, like how the trees grow," Lily observed thoughtfully. "Starting small but getting bigger and stronger each year." "Exactly like that," Beatrice said, smiling at her insightful daughter. "Love is something you tend and nurture just like a garden, and if you do it right, it flourishes." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant purples and pinks, the family sat together in comfortable silence. Tobias looked around at all of them, his heart so full it felt like it might overflow. This was what he had been missing all those years alone on the mountain. Connection, purpose, love. Beatrice had brought all of that into his life, along with the joy he had never imagined possible. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes that come with time. Rose eventually married a young carpenter from Cannon City, a good man who reminded Tobias of himself at that age. Lily married a farmer and settled nearby, close enough to visit regularly. The twins went into business together, running a successful lumber operation. Violet became a teacher, just like her older sister had wanted to be. And Theodore, the baby, grew into a strong young man who decided to stay on the mountain, helping his aging father run the homestead. Through it all, Tobias and Beatrice remained devoted to each other. Their hair turned gray, their bodies slowed down, but their love never wavered. They still sat by the fire on cold nights, still held hands while watching the sunset, still marveled at the life they had built together. One evening in the fall of 1910, when Tobias was 64 and Beatrice was 55, they sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, children of their children, carrying on the legacy of love and family that Tobias and Beatrice had created. 32 years, Beatrice said softly. It has been 32 years since I knocked on your door. Best 32 years of my life, Tobias said, his voice still strong despite his age. And I look forward to 32 more. We might not have 32 more, Beatrice said realistically, though there was no sadness in her voice. But we will have whatever time we are given, and we will make it count. Just like we always have, Tobias agreed. They watched the sunset, surrounded by the sounds of family and life and love. The cabin that had once been a refuge for a lonely man had become a home filled with generations of happiness. And it had all started with one desperate woman seeking shelter on a rainy night, and one lonely man who chose to open his door. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had turned me away? Beatrice asked, a question she had asked before over the years. No, Tobias said firmly, because I know I never would have. You were always meant to be here, Beatrice. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. Sometimes I think the universe conspired to bring you to my door that night, knowing we both needed each other. Maybe it did, Beatrice said with a smile, and I am grateful for every moment since. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Tobias pulled Beatrice close and she rested her head on his shoulder. Their grandchildren's laughter floated up to them, a reminder of the legacy they had created. 6 children, all grown and thriving. 14 grandchildren so far, with more surely to come. A family built on love, nurtured with care, and sustained by the unbreakable bond between two people who had found each other against all odds. Theodore came up onto the porch, carrying his youngest daughter, who was just learning to walk. Pa, Ma, we are about to head home. Did you need anything before we go? We have everything we need, Tobias said, looking at his son with pride. You go on and take care of your family. We will see you tomorrow. After Theodore and his family left, and the last of the grandchildren had been collected by their parents, Tobias and Beatrice were alone once more. The cabin, which had been full of noise and activity just moments before, settled into peaceful quiet. Another good day, Beatrice observed. Every day with you is a good day, Tobias replied. They sat together until the night grew cold, then moved inside to their cozy bedroom. The cabin had been updated over the years with modern conveniences, but it still retained the rustic charm that had always defined it. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine they had shared for decades, Tobias felt a deep sense of contentment. Tobias, Beatrice said as they lay in bed, her body curled against his in the way that had become second nature to both of them. Thank you. For what? He asked, even though he knew. For everything. For opening your door that night. For loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. For giving me this beautiful life, this incredible family. For being exactly who you are. I should be thanking you, Tobias said, his arms tightening around her. You saved me, Beatrice. You brought me back to life. Everything good in my world exists because you knocked on my door. Then we saved each other, Beatrice said. And that is the best kind of love story, is it not? Two broken people finding each other and becoming whole. It is, Tobias agreed. And ours is the best love story I know. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, just as they had done thousands of times before. Outside, the mountains stood silent and majestic, bearing witness to the love story that had unfolded in the cabin on its slopes. A love story that had begun with a desperate plea for shelter and had grown into something extraordinary. A family, a legacy, a testament to the power of kindness and the transformative nature of true love. Years continued to pass, and Tobias and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, welcomed new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Their cabin remained the heart of the family, a place where everyone gathered for holidays and special occasions, where stories were told and traditions were passed down. When Tobias was 72 and Beatrice was 63, they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, though technically they had been together for 42 years if you counted from that rainy night in October. The entire family gathered, filling the expanded homestead to capacity. There was food and music and laughter, and at the center of it all were Tobias and Beatrice, still holding hands, still looking at each other with the same love and devotion they had felt decades before. Rose, now in her 40s and a grandmother herself, stood up to give a toast. To my parents, she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, who showed all of us what real love looks like. Who taught us that family is not just about blood but about choice and commitment and showing up for each other every single day. Mama, Pa, thank you for loving each other so well, and for loving all of us so fiercely. You are the foundation upon which this entire family is built. Everyone raised their glasses, and Tobias felt tears prick his eyes. He was not a man who cried easily, but in moments like this, surrounded by the fruits of his and Beatrice's love, he could not help but be moved. Speech, someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Speech, speech. Tobias stood, pulling Beatrice up with him. I am not much for speeches, he began, his voice still strong, despite his age. But I will say this. 42 years ago, a young woman knocked on my door in the middle of a rainstorm. She was pregnant and scared and had nowhere else to go. I could have turned her away. It would have been the easier choice, the safer choice. But I did not, and that decision changed my life forever. He looked down at Beatrice, his eyes soft with love. This woman, my wife, gave me everything. She gave me purpose and joy and a family I never thought I would have. She taught me that being strong does not mean being alone, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Every good thing in my life exists because she walked into it, and I will be grateful for that until my last breath. Beatrice was crying openly now, and so were many of the people in the crowd. Tobias pulled her close, kissing her forehead before continuing. To all of you, our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I want you to remember this. Love is a choice. It is choosing to be kind when you are tired, choosing to forgive when you are hurt, choosing to show up even when it is hard. Your grandmother and I, we have had our challenges over the years. There have been difficult times, scary times, times when we did not know if we would make it. But we chose each other every single day, and that made all the difference. He raised his glass. So here is to love, to family, to the choices that shape our lives and the people who make those choices worthwhile. And most of all, to my Beatrice, who will always be the best decision I ever made. The party continued late into the night, but eventually everyone departed, leaving Tobias and Beatrice alone once more. They stood on their porch looking out at the mountain bathed in moonlight, and Beatrice leaned into Tobias's embrace. That was a beautiful speech, she said. I meant every word, Tobias replied. I know you did, Beatrice said, and I feel the same way about you. You were my salvation, Tobias, my safe harbor in the storm. I would not have survived without you, and I would not want to. We have had a good life, Tobias observed. The best life, Beatrice corrected. Better than I ever could have imagined. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, comfortable in the silence that only comes from decades of shared experience. Finally, as the night grew late, they went inside to bed, moving slowly but still together, still a team. As Tobias drifted off to sleep that night, his last thought before unconsciousness claimed him was one of profound gratitude. He had been given a gift, a second chance at life and love, and he had made the most of it. His legacy was not just the homestead he had built or the wealth he had accumulated. It was the family he had raised, the love he had shared, the example he had set. And all of it had started with one simple choice: to open his door to a stranger in need. The years rolled on, bringing with them the inevitable sorrows that come with old age. Friends passed away, health declined, the world changed in ways that sometimes felt too fast to comprehend. But through it all, Tobias and Beatrice remained steadfast in their love for each other. They were each other's constant, the one unchanging thing in a world that never stopped moving. When Tobias was 78, he fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from Cannon City and did what he could, but everyone knew that at Tobias's age, the outcome was uncertain. Beatrice never left his side, sitting by his bed day and night, holding his hand and talking to him even when he slipped in and out of consciousness. You cannot leave me yet, she whispered one night when things looked particularly grim. We still have more time. We still have more life to live together. Tobias, fighting through the fog of fever, squeezed her hand weakly. Not done yet, he rasped, too stubborn, and he was right. Against all odds, he recovered, emerging from the illness thin and weak but alive. It took months for him to regain his strength, but he did, aided by Beatrice's devoted care and his own fierce determination. When he was finally well enough to sit on the porch again, to feel the sun on his face and the mountain air in his lungs, he wept with relief. I thought I was going to lose you, Beatrice said, sitting beside him and gripping his hand tightly. Not yet, Tobias said. I am not ready to leave you, not for a long while yet, and he kept that promise. Years passed, and while both of them slowed down considerably, they remained active and engaged with life. They still welcomed their ever-growing family, still tended a small garden, still sat together in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. When Tobias turned 85 in 1919, the family threw another big celebration. The homestead was filled with 4 generations of Barrett descendants, all of them there to honor the man who had started it all. Tobias, now moving with the aid of a cane but still possessing the same fierce spirit, looked around at the assembled crowd with wonder. 85 years, he said to Beatrice, who at 77 was still beautiful to him. I never thought I would see this day. We are blessed. Beatrice said simply, "So very blessed." That night, after everyone had gone and they were alone in their bedroom, Tobias held Beatrice close and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that rainy night so many decades ago to this moment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well nurtured. "I would do it all again," he said into the darkness. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again and again, and I would choose you," Beatrice replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Always you." They fell asleep in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds, and had built a life more beautiful than either of them had ever dreamed possible. When Tobias Barrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89 in 1923, he was surrounded by his family. Beatrice was holding his hand just as she had been for nearly 45 years of marriage. His last words were, "I love you," directed at the woman who had changed his life with a simple knock on a door during a rainstorm. Beatrice lived for 5 more years after Tobias's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of the man she had loved and the life they had built together. She never remarried, saying that she had already had her great love and needed no other. When she passed away in her sleep at the age of 87 in 1928, she was buried next to Tobias on the mountain they both loved in a small family cemetery overlooking the cabin where their story had begun. On her headstone, which matched his, were the words, "She knocked, and he answered, and everything changed." The cabin and the homestead remained in the Barrett family, passed down through the generations as a reminder of where it all started. The story of Tobias and Beatrice became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what true love looks like. The wooden plaque that Tobias had carved, declaring it the Barrett family home, hung above the door for over a century, a testament to the legacy of two people who chose to love fiercely and build something lasting. And on rainy autumn nights, when the wind howled through the mountains and the world seemed cold and dark, family members swore they could sometimes feel the presence of Tobias and Beatrice in the cabin. Not as ghosts, but as a lingering warmth, a sense of comfort and safety that spoke to the enduring power of their love. Their story had ended, but their legacy lived on in every descendant who valued family, in every couple who chose each other daily, in every act of kindness shown to a stranger in need, because in the end, that was the true magic of Tobias and Beatrice's story. It was not just a tale of two people falling in love. It was a reminder that one choice, one act of compassion, one willingness to open your door and your heart, could change not just your own life but the lives of generations to come. It was proof that love, real and true and committed, had the power to transform everything it touched, creating ripples that spread far beyond anything the original lovers could have imagined. And it all started with a pregnant woman begging for shelter at a mountain man's door in the rain, and a lonely man who gave her not just a corner of his cabin but his whole heart.